KTN News. We guarantee and are going to keep you posted on the State of the Nation address as it prepares to be delivered this afternoon by the President as per the Constitution of Kenya. Now, this year, it has come a little bit later than other years, and this is because, of course, of the protracted electioneering period and the events that took place before. But there you go. Now, the question that we are interacting with you, and I just want to read through it before I come to the guests that we have in studio, basically to look at that, is what areas, what critical thing would you want Uhuru Kenyatta to capture in his State of the Nation address? What critical thing would you want Uhuru Kenyatta to capture in the State of the Nation address? And if you allow me to just read some of the comments that are coming through, we have Tina Bob who says corruption in Kenya. Simply put, corruption. Charles Njero says, I would like him to say where those who were resisting clarion call were hungry but were denounced after caring for their stomachs. And I guess that is to do with the fact that the resist movement was basically yesterday officially closed by the opposition leader Raila Odinga, where he said some of those companies that were being boycotted should now be allowed to continue to operate. Now, Samuel says the president must address corruption in as urgent matter in a way to bond enough to mention offenders rather, and if possible prosecution to serve as wanting to others to distance themselves from some of his allies who are victims or who may fall victim. Well, let me keep your conversation coming, and rather your tweets coming right here as we continue reading them. But allow me now to introduce the guests that we have in studio. And joining me, we have Dr. XN Iraki, who is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We also have Mr. Michael Agwanda, who's a governance policy expert. Thank you for joining us this morning. And maybe let me just start with the same question of what you think is one of the most critical or important things that the president should capture in his State of the Nation address. Let me start with you, Mr. Agwanda.
Thank you, viewers, and thank you, Mike. It's been a while since I was here. I want to say that this is a critical time in the country. It's a time where we've experienced a handshake. It is a time when there seems to be some renewed hope, both the opposition and the government as well. It's a time when a lot...
Kenyans as a whole.
And on Kenyans as a whole. And it's also a time when the politicians seem to be at a crossroad, more so the politicians that have actually benefited from the confusion of the political divide and from knowing what it is to them, attacking and attacking and attacking. You wake up and you attack, even if you don't know you're supposed to attack. Suddenly they're realizing that that attacking has to be toned down a little bit. The rhetoric of opposition and the government. And that is also sort of in confusion now, because people seem not, even the ones that have come out very strongly to criticize the handshake, seem to be told, hold on, gentlemen, by the president himself in a funeral of, Matiba over there. And you can see that there is some expectation from politicians, the country as a whole, and in the international community as well. And so this state of address by the president is hugely awaited for, and everybody, I believe, are thinking of what is the president going to say. Is it to the interests of wananchi, or is it to the interests of the politicians as we've seen it in the past? But one thing, if you ask me, as you well put it, what will I expect the president to address today? Everything else said, I really think that the president must address the issue of corruption in a way that he has never done it before. Over 600 billion Kenyan shillings is lost every single year, with a budget of about 2.5 trillion in a year. You are having over 600 billion lost. And where does this money go to? It goes to people's pockets, And these people are known. That kind of money cannot be just given by hand. It must be wired from one account to the other. And so the government, EACC, the police, know some of these people. But the question is, why are we having a system that condone the biggest thief out there and prosecute the smallest thief?
Okay.
And as long as we are still going to accept these people in our society, as long as we're still going to give them a plum job in our society, as long as we're still going to have them in our political circles, as long as we're still going to have them even think of running for president of this country, we will never move forward. All we'll be doing is benchmarking and actually accepting the evil in the society. We will never even achieve the big four that the president is talking about if we do not address the issue of corruption.
All right, so for you it's corruption. Dr. Iraki, what is the one thing that is critical for you that you'd expect the president to capture?
Good morning, Kenyans. I think one of the things I would expect from the president is surprises.
Surprises?
Yes, I want him to talk about something we never thought about, something we never planned about. But that apart, I think there are a few issues that I believe he should address today. And one of them is, if you look at the most recent economic data, it's an indication that the economy slowed down last year to about 4.9, much below what was expected. So I would want
that is much below what was expected despite the electionary period?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would expect the president to tell us how in the short run and how in the long run he's going to make sure that the economy rebounds. So that's something I would want, very concrete actions. That the economy has slowed down, this is what we are doing. Of course, handshake and the big four might be some of the avenues he can use. But we would want concrete actions that are going to affect the person on the streets, the person on the highest, anybody in the country should feel the effect of that. Number two, which I believe is very critical, is the industrial action. People have been going on strike. It has become the Kenyan tradition. In fact, the handshake I saw between President Uhuru and Raila Odinga should be addressed to the employers and employees so that we have industrial peace. Because when people are always going on strike, they don't work, they are not productive, then we become uncompetitive as a country. So those are some of the two major issues I believe
that you'd want captured.
Yes.
Okay, and maybe while I'm still there, let's look at corruption. And since you're an economist and well versed in those matters, how critical is corruption in terms of affecting our GDP, affecting our growth as a country?
It's a very big issue. It's not just a Kenyan issue, it's a global issue. Because when young men and women realize that you can make money without working, it becomes part of the culture. So nobody wants to work. And that becomes a race towards the bottom. If I can make 5 million by not going to class, why should I go to class? So I think it's not just a political or an economic issue, it's also a moral issue. And everybody in this country must address corruption. I think we just talk about corruption, but we must also address that issue. What are the causes? My colleague talked about that. And anybody else, if you brought anybody else to this particular studio, I'm sure he or she will talk about corruption. So it's not something to talk about, it's something to address. What are the penalties for being corrupt? But most important, what are the incentives for those who are not corrupt? Because I think we give people who are corrupt a lot of publicity. But what about the people who go beyond the core of their duty to do what they're supposed to do, to prevent corruption, to work hard in this country? So let's not just look at the corruption in terms of penalties, but also incentives.
Incentives.
And one of the easiest ways to address corruption in this country is a very simple way. If we can make people feel they are secure in their old age, they have no reason to be corrupt. Because people become corrupt to secure their future. So if, for example, we made sure that once you retire, you get your pension, that once you are old and you have not been employed, you can get some stipend, like the one that the Jubilee government is trying to give the old people. People feel very secure. I have no reason to steal. But the issue of corruption should be addressed from a number of perspectives, sociological, religious, economic, not just talk about it.
All right, Mr. Gwanda, definitely corruption is something that needs a multifaceted approach. It's not just one silver bullet that is going to solve it, but maybe break it down for us to fully understand the cost of corruption. Because sometimes we talk about corruption and I think even some politicians are on record saying the only reason why anybody would raise their head against corruption is because they don't have access to it. So there is the moral issue, but the cost of corruption to the Kenyan. When you go to a hospital and you're supposed, through your taxes, you're supposed to have been taken care of, but you cannot be taken care of because the equipment is broken down. When possibly you go to a police station and they don't have a vehicle to answer to your emergency, simply because maybe somebody short-circuited the circuit. Maybe break it down for us. What really is the cost of corruption?
You know, I want to borrow from my colleague here, and we happen to have studied both in America, and so we know what Social Security is in America, where basically you work hard in your life, in your youthful life, and then after retirement, you could simply not depend on anybody else, but be assured that you'll have a check every month that will take care of your needs. If you are assured of that, there will be no reason why you need to steal from your employer to put it aside so that when you grow old, you can depend on it. That is one big problem that this country is facing. Even the people that have been that are retired and have been working somehow end up not getting their pension. And so the question is, if I don't, and I was an officer in government, and I don't even get my pension because of bureaucracy, perhaps in getting that pension, then how am I going to retire? I may not have children that have gone to school and are able to take care of me, and so I have to steal and put it aside. But the problem in Kenya today is that people are starting to do what other corrupt nations are doing, where they are putting 10% as an equivocal amount of bribe that you must give to suppliers, to somebody giving you the tender.
That sounds like tithe.
Yeah, it sounds like tithe though, but you tenderpreneur, like you go and they say, oh, before we give you this, 10% is going to belong to us. Or, before we give you this.
We even have a name for it, facilitation fee.
Facilitation fee. And they do not even go to that extent. We've seen cases where if you wanted, for example, to buy a camera of that nature, it could cost 100,000. But the guy at the procurement department makes sure it is 150,000 so that the 50,000 goes into people's pocket, the supplier still will have to pay the 10% out of it. When you look at this, it increases the cost of building the roads. It increases the cost of buying motor vehicles in this country that will help. It increases the cost of petroleum. It increases the cost of food, and it spirals to the last thing that you need and you put on your table, which is sugar and food, because that cost has to go up because somebody else had to pocket some extra money that was not ideally the cost of the commodity. And so when you get into a society where everybody is thinking of what can I get out of this vis-a-vis what is the cost of this paper and pen. We saw what happened with Lusaka when he was the governor. At one point, one of his staff bought a wheelbarrow at an exorbitant price, and you're wondering, 100,000 shillings, I can walk across the street and literally buy that wheelbarrow at about 6,000, and I have a wheelbarrow and I'm going home. And you can see this, and it was argued, people were taken to court, and I tell you, those people are out there, but 100,000 has already been pocketed because that money literally was not the cost of that property. As long as we continue having these people in a society, and we can also throw blames and say, oh, the courts are probably not doing their job, they're not putting these guys into jail. But if all the paperwork was done properly, Michael, this guy has no reason to be jailed. Every paperwork was signed. Everybody signed these papers and they sanctioned this buying at 100,000 per wheelbarrow. You can't jail this guy.
And no wonder then they're called cartels, because it looks like it's not just one person, but it's a whole system that has a problem.
That's why we cannot realize some of the things we are having. When we talk about SGR, which the cost was about 225 billion, and suddenly it went up to 335 billion, and then you're wondering, oh, but where is this other 100 billion that was put into this? Is there anything extra that perhaps we got out of this SGR by increasing the cost and the cost of building in the country? Really, we need to be honest to ourselves and say, look, if the pen costs 50 shillings, Let's have the pens at 50 shillings. Why must we have the suppliers, or why must we complicate the procurement system to an extent where you cannot go and buy the pens from Nakumat or Uchumi? Now you have to get a supplier who says the pens, that specific specs of pen, will now cost you 500. Oh, because sometimes you delay in your payment, or sometimes you do this and that. And you see this, we are complicating the process so that we can make it easier for the manipulation of the prices.
Of the
and
prices.
It costs the country.
All right, Mr. Gwanda, I'll come to you, Dr. Iraki, in just a bit. I wanted to take a short break. And what I'd like us to look at is also the state of the economy. It's one of the things that many Kenyans would hope that would be captured in the State of the Nation address as to where we are in the economy. We do know that as per the Labor Day being marked yesterday, the employers, or rather the minimum wage was raised with 5%. What does that mean? Where are we as a country in terms of the economy, and where do we need to be? It is now 25 minutes to 8. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, let's continue with the discussion as we await the State of the Nation address to be given by the President later on today.